Is the third time the charm? Not always. My third attempt at 100 miles. Interesting story because I actually applied to get into the Bear 100 and I was so late. I was actually number 115 on the wait list. So I actually sent a text message to Leland Barker, the race director, and an email, I should say, and asked him, is there any chance that I will get into this race? He said, very, very unlikely. Your chances are slim to none. So I pretty much gave up on the Bear and registered for the Grindstone 100, an incredibly beautiful but rocky and technical course on the East Coast in Stanton, Virginia. And as soon as I made my plane reservations for Grindstone, I get an email saying, congratulations, you've been accepted into the Bear 100. Do you want us to charge your credit card? Well, immediately I'm like, holy crap, I just registered for Grindstone, paid my plane ticket. I'm pretty much set now. So I emailed Leland Barker, the race director for the Bear, back and said, what the heck happened? He said, Kim, what often happens is that when people realize they're that far down on the wait list, they start dropping off the wait list, and you actually moved up to an acceptable spot. I said, well, I can't do it now because I've already registered for Grindstone. I'll have to wait and run the Bear another year. He understood. I was disappointed about the Bear, but excited about Grindstone. Well, in the weeks leading up to Grindstone, my training went really well. I was running a lot of technical, rocky terrain to get used to Grindstone. And wouldn't you know it, a week before the race, I came down with an incredible flu. I was on my butt. It was incredible. I had 102 temperature, felt like crap. Still went to school every day, teaching every day. Should have stayed home, but I didn't. As fate would have it, the hurricane, I think it was the big hurricane that hit New York. What was it called? I'm so stupid. The hurricanes were coming across the East Coast and inundated the Stanton, Virginia area. So the race was canceled, officially postponed, because if the race director, Clark Zeeland, was able to get a permit very quickly for the next weekend, he was going to move the race back 1 week and have it after most of the rains had subsided. Somehow he was able to pull off a miracle, and we were informed that if we wanted to run Grindstone, we could run. We were still entered in the race. Otherwise, he couldn't refund our entries, but he could get us into the race for next year. I wanted to run, even though I was sick. The extra week gave me a little chance to recover, and so I made my plane reservations. I changed my plane reservations, I should say, from flying into Charlotte, Virginia, into flying to Baltimore, Maryland. And it was about $150 difference in fee with the changes and all. And I was set. I was ready to go to Grindstone. So out I go to Grindstone, and I get there the day before the race and met several new people. Christopher Agbe is one of them, and he and I went to dinner at a really nice restaurant in Stanton and got to know each other pretty well. Jeff Nelson, I met Jeff Nelson at the campsite, and we actually camped outside of the park. And everything was set for Grindstone. Grindstone is a unique race in that it starts at 5:30 in the evening. And so within 30 minutes, you're in the dark. You're on some technical rocky trails in the dark. And the rains weren't totally out of the area. We actually started getting light rain. I was prepared this time after my debacle at the Bighorn 100, getting hypothermic, etc. So I had my rain jacket on right away and was actually doing very well, and got to the top of the first big climb, and you had to punch a hole in your number to show that you had been there, and several of us were trying to use the hole puncher, and it would not punch, so we did our best to make an indention at least, so the aid stations and the finish line officials would know that we actually had been to that particular climb, to the top of that particular climb. And then you have to come back down the same hill on a fairly rocky power line road, and there's a sharp left turn that you have to carefully look for, or you will miss it and you'll end up going pretty much all the way back down the hill. So sure enough, I missed the turn. I'm hauling ass down the hill and realized that I should have probably turned long before then. So I asked some runners, where's the turn, to get to the next aid station after the climb? They said, oh, you missed it. It's about a half mile back. So I had to climb back up the steep hill, adding about a total of maybe half a mile to a mile to my overall race. I finally get on the correct trail, and it is pitch black, of course, and the most technical part of the race so far. And I actually pulled out my hiking poles. Now, I had never used hiking poles in races. I'd only used them in Banff, Canada, when my brother and I went there for hiking. I used them in Yosemite when we went there to do Half Dome, but I'd never actually used them in a race. Not a good time to experiment with poles. The poles were a good idea, don't get me wrong, but the course was extremely rocky with several sections where the rocks were embedded and there were big holes and cracks between the rocks, so I almost broke my poles several times. Somehow avoided that. Didn't have any major falls until crossing a creek bed at mile 20, less than a mile from an aid station. I was going up a steep embankment, and I just crossed through some water about 18 inches deep, and I didn't quite have good footing, so I slipped back into the water, tried again, and totally lost my balance and fell backwards on my back into the creek. My head and my back hit some rocks in the creek, so I was stunned, probably a little bit concussed, and definitely had some back issues. And fortunately, there was a couple behind me that saw me fall, and they actually helped me get out of the creek. My headlamp had come off. It was in the water, but not damaged, thank goodness. We saw it down there shining brightly in the 18 inches of water. So I got up and I could barely walk. I was having, once again, as I did it at Pine to Palm, back spasms. And I knew that I was going to do the best I could on the uphills and probably struggle on the downs, having experienced that before. I vowed not to drop out of this race. I was going to time out if I had to, which means you don't make the cutoff times. Well, I made it to the next aid station. The couple ahead of me had warned the aid station that I was in difficulty, and they checked me out and asked me if I wanted to go on. I said, darn betcha. Kept going, made it to the next aid station, and that particular aid station was manned by Andy Jones Wilkins, and I had told him before the race that I would see him at such and such mile. I think it was mile maybe 20, must have been close to mile 30. It was mile 30, and Andy was asleep. The entire aid station was asleep. So rather than wake anyone up, it was well after midnight by that particular time, I simply helped myself to some food, had some really good zucchini bread or something. No, it was cornbread. It was homemade Southern cornbread. And off I went, realizing that I had less than an hour to make the next 6 miles in order to be under the cutoff. I knew there was no way. There was a lot of climbing and technical descending on super rocky trails. If you've ever seen the East Coast Appalachian type trails, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I did not make the cutoff. I struggled as best I could to get there in time. Got there about 35, 40 minutes over the cutoff. And at mile 36, I was out of the Grindstone 100. And amazingly, Andy Jones Wilkins, before the race, had told me that there are some really runnable sections on this course. Well, I don't remember any runnable sections, and when I saw him a couple of days later, or a day and a half later, at the finish line area, I told him about that. I said, what are you talking about, runnable sections? He said, well, you didn't get to the runnable sections. The section after where you timed out is very runnable for the next 12 or 13 miles or so. I said, oh, great. So I didn't see this quote-unquote easy part of the course, and there's nothing easy about Grindstone. The nature of starting at 5:30 in the evening pretty much guarantees that unless you are the winner or very close to winning the race, you're going to have 2 night times. David Horton started that particular race, if I'm not mistaken. If you know David Horton, he likes to inflict pain and suffering on his runners. He's a wonderful guy, but he definitely believes in difficult courses. He's one of the few Barkley finishers, one of the first, actually he and Blake Wood were the first American finishers of the Barkley Marathon. So David knows how to inflict pain and how to endure pain. So thank you, David Horton, for definitely inflicting some pain on this guy. So failure number 3, the third time was not the charm. And what did I learn from this race? I don't know what I learned from this race, to be honest with you, other than, I did do technical training this time, so I was prepared for the rocky technical trails. I wasn't prepared to lose my balance and fall in the dark on my back and head, but I was at least glad that I did my best to stay in the race. Yeah, I timed out, but I didn't just quit on my own, and I was going to go until they pulled me from the race. I didn't want to have another DNF on my resume. So time number 3, failure number 3, darn it. one of these days I'm going to get one of these 100s done. There again, all three of those races were Hard Rock qualifiers. Pine to Palm, that was the last year it was a Hard Rock qualifier, but it would have gotten me 2 years in the Hard Rock lottery. Same with Bighorn, same with Grindstone. So I missed a third chance of getting to the Hard Rock lottery. No lottery. I was destined to work at Hard Rock, but not run Hard Rock or even be in the lottery for a chance to run Hard Rock. So 100 miler number 3, not successful. We'll talk later about 100-mile attempt number 4. By the way, that must have been October of 2016, 2015. Oh God, my years blend together here. 2015, we'll say 2015. I'll correct it on the next video if I have to. Anyway, Grindstone, wonderful race, highly recommend it. Clark Zeeland, an incredible race director. Beautiful course, at least the part I saw of it, from what I could make out in the dark, because my experience was mostly in the dark at the Grindstone 100, but I highly recommend it. The times are never super fast there because of the technical, difficult nature of the course, but there have been some good performances. Jeff Browning, Carl Meltzer, 2 notable winners of that particular race. And yeah, highly recommend it. Go to Grindstone. Maybe I'll go back there someday. Who knows? Let's go outside. Oh, let's go outside. Yeah, he's ready.